One of the biggest questions I get is on small trees. People are saying, why isn't my tree surviving, or why isn't it thriving? What's wrong with my tree? So I'm at a client's house today, and she has a number of trees that have died. Many of them are in different states of decline, and she asked me to inspect them. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go through and I'm going to show you all the things that I find, and you may be able to use some of this information to help out your own landscape. Now, it's important to recognize that it's generally not a problem. It's usually a series of problems. So what we got here is there's a grouping of 10 Japanese maples that she put in, and the location is not the greatest. She planted these trees underneath the canopy of a big oak tree. There's the oak tree, and the oak tree is still going to get bigger and bigger. So in the long haul, these trees didn't stand a chance to begin with. So we got in there and started digging them out. She said, just cut them down. And I said, well, actually it'd be better to dig them out, because if you have the trunk of the tree to work with, then you can get the whole thing out of there. But if you cut it down to the ground, that increases the difficulty of the job significantly. And two people make it a lot better. One person's pulling on the trunk and the other person is digging. You can kind of rotate it and work it around, and they come out pretty fast. Now, these aren't long-term trees that have been in the ground for many, many years. They were fairly large trees at the initial planting. There you go. There's, I think that's about 7 or 8 of them so far. And the root ball on each of these trees was quite insignificant, which tells me that all these trees that were planted were in the pots far too long. And while I was here, I also wanted to inspect the irrigation system for many of these plants. So they've got kind of a low volume emitter type of a system with these little sprinkler heads, which are not bad, but they do have a lot of problems. They get clogged up easily, and the location of many of these sprinklers is right on top of the root ball, but not at the edge of the root ball to promote new growth. And I found so many of them that just were insignificant. They either weren't working at all, they were turned off, or the volume of water was just not enough. I don't know what the amount of time on the timer is. I'll have to ask her that. But I turned on the controllers by hand and watched each of these stations to see how much water was coming out on each of the trees. And some of them were quite a lot of water, and others were barely trickling out at all. So that tells me there's something going on in the system itself. Maybe there was a leak, maybe there was something in the lines. The maybes can go on and on and on. But if you're not getting an adequate amount of water for a young tree, then it's never going to thrive. It's never going to evolve. So I'm looking at all of these trees. She planted about 25 or 30 crepe myrtles on the property. And she asked me to figure out, she said the gardeners got in there and did a little bit of adjustment. And I got to say, I was quite irritated when I went in and looked at every single one of these sprinklers when they were coming on, because I found about 10 of them that were completely turned off. So let's go take a look at the root ball from one of the trees that we dug out. You can see that the roots are not spreading out very far at all. I have to ask her how long these trees have been in the ground, but I believe they've been in there 4 or 5 years, and they still look like the containment of what they were in the pots. So back to watering, there are some that were just really, really, hardly anything coming on. See, I turned that one on, so that particular plant was not getting much water at all. So look at that. You have to turn on each station manually, one at a time, and go check all the way along the whole run, because so many things can happen. And if you don't turn it on and look at them one by one, and don't ask your gardeners to do it. I mean, most gardeners, that I hate to say it, but they really don't know what they're doing when it comes to irrigation. Forgive me if you're a gardener that does know, and if you do, I really appreciate that. But in my experiences, from what I see, it's like most gardeners they should choose a different career because they're not doing your plants any good at all. Look at that. Look at all these sprinklers I have to turn back on, get the water going again. And it was interesting to see the volume of water coming out of some of these. Some were much higher and some which were barely coming on. And that one, they changed out all 4 of them to little tiny emitters that were barely putting out any water at all. There's another one. It was turned off, got to turn it back on. And there's a gopher hole, which could be part of the problem, but there is another issue with gophers, that the water that does go down often runs the course of the gopher hole itself. So even if you've got a sprinkler system going, the water could just run away from the trees. So there's all these issues, all these simple things that you have to look at, and it's really not that complicated, but it does mean you got to go out there and look. So I went one step further, and because each of these root balls was just bound up, I used this tool right here to break up the root balls a little bit, break up the hard soil outside of the planting area, which was another issue. Now, a healthy plant is able to combat a lot of diseases, insects, and other issues that seem to be attacking the plants. This Japanese maple is afflicted with verticillium wilt. And here's another issue. I oftentimes say take out the stakes, but stakes can also be a protection from deer antlers. I see oftentimes young trees where a buck will come along and try to scrape off the velvet on the young trees, and that damages the bark. And don't leave it staked for so long. A tree needs to move in order to build up taper. So you can leave the side stakes in there, but disconnect the ties. And furthermore, plants are expensive.